The laughter came first, sharp glittering, and young rising out of the red sports car that had just screeched to a stop inches from my legs. I felt the breath slam out of me as I tumbled to the lawn, grass cold and damp beneath my palms, heart riotous in my chest. Tyler's phone hovered like an eye over prey. His friends' voices made a chorus of delight. Too slow, Grandma. He called handsome features twisted with a cruelty that did not belong to my family. 1 week later, that same video sat on the evening news, beneath a headline about dangerous pranks on elders, and the world saw me sprawled and frightened, while my son pressed the remote with a sigh and told me I was being dramatic. I had moved into Robert's house 5 years earlier after Frank died, surrendering the tidy rhythms of our Vermont home for a small bedroom that had once been a storage closet. The compromise felt temporary, at first a place to find my footing to grieve in company. I had spent 40 years teaching American literature and living comfortably with the century-old habits of reading, investing, and keeping my own counsel. I knew how to navigate technology, how to write, how to choose. But grief is a slow erosion, and in its silt, other people plant their flags. The night the news aired, my humiliation voices filtered through the thin walls like a draft, Diane's smooth practicality, Robert's furrowed concern. Peaceful Pines has openings, she said. With her pension and insurance, we could cover it and finally remodel the kitchen. She's getting worse, Robert agreed. The doctor said these episodes of confusion might increase. What doctor? I had not seen any doctor who said any such thing. I clutched Frank's photograph and felt something in me, something I had mistaken for gone stir awake with teeth. Morning arrived with bright dishes and small smiles. Robert's voice carried the syrup of benevolence. Diane didn't look up from her phone. Tyler smirked behind his cereal spoon. I tried for something ordinary, a visit to my closest friend, Judith Levine, a retired attorney whose laugh could still shake dust out of a room. "Oh, I don't think that's a good idea," Diane interrupted. "You seem tired. I said I'd drive myself." Robert chuckled that we sold my car last year. Wasn't I the one who agreed I had not? When I reached for my phone, Emma, my granddaughter, the one who still met my eyes, returned with a clunky plastic device I'd never seen. Simplified for seniors, Tyler explained, patient as a warden. No internet, no numbers. I needed no exits. Later, searching for my old address book, I found my documents rearranged and diminished, financial statements, missing checkbook, gone the deed to the Vermont house nowhere. "We sold that 2 years ago," Robert said, tapping the dining table as if it were a witness stand. "You signed right here." I had signed nothing. Each refusal to show paperwork was fitted neatly into the story of my forgetfulness, as if their erasures were proof of my vanishing. It would have worked on a different woman. It nearly worked on me. But Emma arrived at midnight with a tablet tucked under her arm, and a look I recognized from the mirror of my younger self, quiet defiance. She showed me how to hide the device, and how to slip like a diver returning to the surface, back into the world I'd been pushed out of. When she left, I sat with the soft blue light on my face and remembered that once I'd taught students how narratives are controlled, who speaks, who is silenced, who gets to define truth. The next week, Emma came again with family photos to scan, and in her hurry to greet a study group at the door, left her laptop open to the shared cloud storage Robert insisted the family use for security. My hands shook as I moved to close it, then stilled. Security, after all, is a word that can mean prison or protection. The files were categorized in the precise way my son had always admired in me. There were scanned copies of my financial records emails with Westbrook Bank, fabricated notes from a Dr. Mercer I'd never met, and letters to my brother George's lawyer suggesting I was slipping toward incompetence. I photographed each screen with Emma's tablet, one quiet click at a time, like someone rescuing pages from a fire. Emma didn't flinch when I told her. She had suspected something. She had heard whispers about consolidating my accounts for efficiency, and with a reluctant steadiness that made me both proud and afraid, she revealed the rest. Robert had lost a great deal of money in a cryptocurrency scheme, and the house wore multiple mortgages like stacked debts. It was not just exploitation, it was a plan with timelines and steps, a dismantling of my autonomy disguised as care. I needed an ally with authority. Dr. Harris, my primary physician, became that ally in the quietest of ways. In his office with Robert, briefly dismissed under standard practice, the confusion sloughed from my shoulders. I told him what I knew and what I feared, asked him to independently document my cognition, and slid him a note with Judith's contact information. He had noticed discrepancies, he admitted. He would verify everything, protect the assessment, and consider calling Judith. So, I began to perform. Literature had taught me the power of an unreliable narrator, and life had now asked me to become one for my own survival. I shuffled when Robert watched, fretted, gently misplaced small things by design. I asked twice for the same information and apologized for forgetting. I offered, with just enough tremor in my voice, a tidbit about an old international investment from Frank that might be worth $500,000, then let the bait drift where his worry could find it. Behind that performance, Judith reached out through Dr. Harris. A former prosecutor named Patrick reviewed what I had gathered and showed me how to gather more. We spoke softly in my room about method and patience, about proving the pattern without tipping it off. Emma installed a monitoring app on Robert's computer under the guise of a coding project, promising herself that morality sometimes meant choosing the lesser wrong to prevent the greater harm. When Robert grabbed my arm one morning to stop me from calling a taxi to Vermont, the pressure left fingerprints on my thin skin, proof that even soft masks slip. Mrs. Peterson from next door peered in with concern, and Robert fluttered his public son's smile for her benefit. But the timeline had accelerated. An appointment appeared with Dr. Mercer for that very afternoon, and a tour of Peaceful Pines followed close behind. I looked into the hallway where Emma stood with her phone to her ear and knew the storm I had awakened would not die quiet. It would break finally where it needed to, upon the truth. Dr. Mercer's office smelled of antiseptic and polished wood, the kind of scent meant to assure trust. His walls bore diplomas that looked heavy with authority, though Patrick had warned me they were the props of a man under investigation for questionable rulings. Robert sat close, leaning in as though proximity could shape the story. "Your son tells me you've been experiencing paranoia." Mercer began, his tone smooth with sympathy. I tilted my head, feigning uncertainty. "Sometimes I get lost in memories," I murmured, letting my voice tremble. Robert pounced, adding that I had accused him of stealing forgotten property sales, imagined conspiracies. Mercer nodded gravely, readying his forms. The tests began, drawing shapes, remembering lists, answering questions. I performed carefully, letting hesitation lace through clarity, offering enough doubt to keep Mercer from delivering the judgment Robert expected. Midway, I excused myself for the restroom. Alone, I left an envelope on his desk. Documents of his own pending ethics charges, testimonials from families he had wronged, and a note from Patrick outlining possible legal consequences. When I returned, Mercer's face was pale, his voice clipped. "We will need more evaluations, perhaps neuroimaging, before making any determination." Robert's jaw tightened, but his show of patience cracked in the glare of a doctor, unwilling to sign the papers he needed. That night, I told Emma quietly that the plan was working. She helped me pack a discreet bag and whispered that Patrick had arranged the next phase. At Peaceful Pines the following morning, we were greeted by Susan Miller, the director, whose handshake lingered with unspoken understanding. Protocol, she said, gently required private conversation with prospective residents. Robert bristled, but allowed it. Once the office door closed, Susan's tone shifted. "Patrick contacted me," she confirmed. "The evidence is compelling. Are you prepared to proceed?" I dropped the frail posture spine straightening. Completely. Within minutes, Dr. Harris entered through a side door playing his part. Mrs. Foster may be experiencing concerning symptoms, he told Susan loud enough for Robert to hear when we emerged. She needs immediate hospital evaluation. Robert's protests followed us into the ambulance, but the flashing lights cut him off. In that hospital room, the performance ended. Patrick and a trusted neurologist documented every test, every measure of clarity. My mind was sharp. The record proved it. Emma's monitoring software had captured Robert searching involuntary commitment procedures and manipulating documents late at night. Marina, the journalist Patrick had enlisted, had traced Robert's financial collapse through public records. The pieces aligned, each one a nail in the coffin of his pretense. The knock came, as predicted. Robert stormed in, eyes frantic. "There are police at our house," he hissed. "What is going on?" I sat upright, no longer playing the confused mother. "They're investigating the money you stole, the property you sold with forged signatures, the accounts you drained." He sneered, trying one last time. "No one will believe you. You're just a confused old woman." His mistake was forgetting the small red light blinking on the detective's recorder resting on the table. When the officer stepped back in, Robert's fury deflated into silence. I gave my statement in full, tracing the arc of exploitation from the stolen car keys to the fabricated medical files. The officer listened with patient gravity, confirming what Patrick had already told me. This pattern was common, the betrayal of trust, the sharpest blade. Outside the door, commotion flared. Tyler's voice, frantic, carried down the hall. His friends had turned over the original car video, the one that showed them plotting the prank, as a test of my reaction. Handcuffed, he was led away, his arrogance burned to ash. Emma slipped into my room, her young face pale but resolute. "Grandma, everything is coming apart," she whispered. "Dad, Tyler, even Mom, they're all being questioned." I took her hand, steadying her trembling fingers. "No," I said softly. "They came apart long ago. What you see now is only the truth showing itself." The weeks that followed were measured in hearings, documents, and the slow machinery of justice. Robert faced charges of financial exploitation, fraud, forgery, and misuse of power of attorney. Tyler entered a diversion program, community service at Oakwood Senior Center and Therapy. Diane claimed ignorance, but Emma uncovered emails showing she had researched retirement facilities months earlier, preparing for my removal. Marina's investigative article, careful to shield our names, spread nationally and drew a flood of responses from elders who had been silenced in similar ways. Each email was another echo of pain, another reminder that my story was not unique, but emblematic. I began meeting with some of them in the Riverside community room after I moved into a modest senior apartment. We shared tea, told stories of losses and survivals, and rebuilt something that exploitation had tried to take dignity. My granddaughter, now my fiercest ally, attended every meeting. Judith guided the legal paperwork, Patrick monitored the investigation, and Emma designed digital tools to keep others safe from the same traps that had ensnared me. In the small apartment with its single key that only I possessed, life began again. Fragile, but honest, like green shoots breaking through frost. 6 months later, the trial reached its end. Robert sat diminished, his polished confidence stripped by court orders and evidence he could not erase. The judge's voice carried the final words: guilty on all counts, sentenced to 5 years probation, restitution of $342,000, and community service barred forever from managing another's finances. No prison bars, but to Robert, whose pride rested on reputation, the punishment bit deeper than steel. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. "Mrs. Foster, how do you feel about the verdict?" one asked. I stood with Emma's hand clasped in mine and answered plainly, "This is not about my feelings. It is about accountability." Elder exploitation is a hidden epidemic. If my case helps one person recognize the signs and seek help, then something good has grown from this pain. And so began the next chapter of my life, not as a victim erased by family, but as an advocate who refused silence. The months that followed the verdict were not marked by triumph, but by reconstruction. I settled into my apartment at Riverside, a modest one-bedroom with windows overlooking a community garden where children laughed and volunteers planted herbs. For the first time in years, I locked a door that was mine alone. Emma helped unpack the pieces of my salvaged life photographs. They hadn't managed to erase a few books Judith had rescued from donation piles and a new laptop that restored my access to the world. Judith visited often, her sharp wit undimmed, guiding me through the labyrinth of asset recovery. Some money was gone forever, devoured by Robert's failed schemes, but George's bequest arrived quickly, a steady foundation for my independence. Diane filed for divorce soon after the trial, claiming she had been blindsided. Yet Emma's evidence showed her quiet complicity: emails about retirement homes, discussions about selling my jewelry. Marina's series on elder exploitation, which avoided our names, nonetheless reached thousands. Letters and emails poured in from across the country. Martha, whose daughter had emptied her accounts. James, whose grandson had stolen his identity. Sophia, whose family had tried to declare her incompetent when she refused to hand over her house. I thought I was alone, Martha confessed at our first meeting in the Riverside community room. 10 of us sat in a circle, fragile yet fierce. There should be no shame in being victimized, I told her. The shame belongs to those who exploit trust. Slowly, what began as a gathering of survivors became something larger. We called it Elders with Voice. Emma built us a website. Judith helped draft protective checklists. Marina connected us with journalists and advocates. I found myself busier at 85 than I had been in decades, leading workshops, speaking at universities, consulting with adult protective services. Each story I heard was another page in a book that needed writing, another echo of my own ordeal transformed into purpose. Robert's messages still arrived, desperate and pleading. "The house is gone," Emma reported one evening. "He wants to negotiate." I watered my basil plant, now thriving in the sunlight. "He expects me to save him," I said quietly, like I always did before. Emma watched me closely. "Will you?" I shook my head. Some things cannot be saved. Some things should not. 18 months after my hospitalization, justice came in the final form of sentencing. Robert, stripped of influence, faced his punishment. The courtrooms no longer frightened me. They had become stages where truth could finally stand without disguise. Yet what lingered afterward was not vengeance, but exhaustion, tempered by relief. I spoke at more conferences, teaching younger generations about warning signs about autonomy, about how easily family can cloak exploitation in the language of care. It was on one such autumn afternoon, golden light streaming across my desk, as I prepared for a lecture, that I heard the hesitant knock. Tyler stood there, thinner, his arrogance burned away. He wore the vest of an Oakwood volunteer, his eyes older than his years. "Grandma," he said, his voice cracking. "I wasn't sure you'd see me." I invited him in, poured tea, and waited. He spoke of community college classes, of part-time work at Oakwood, of Mr. Simmons, a retired history professor who had taught him chess, and stories of civil rights marches. One day, I realized, "This is what I almost missed with you," he said, tears glinting. "This is what Dad taught me to throw away." For the first time in years, I felt the shell around my heart soften. Redemption perhaps does not come through excuses, but through labor, through changed behavior. Tyler had begun that work. I offered no easy forgiveness, but I let him stay for tea, and in that silence, something small but real took root. 2 years after the verdict, I stood in a university auditorium addressing students of social work and elder law. My memoir, co-written with Marina, had become required reading. Emma sat in the front row now, a cybersecurity specialist dedicated to protecting seniors from scams. Judith Still, my fiercest ally, beamed beside her. Tyler lingered in the back, his presence both fragile and brave. And Robert, after months of probation restitution and therapy, had written again and again, requesting to see me. That day, for the first time, I agreed. He sat in the shadows of the auditorium, older, diminished, but there. The question I'm asked most often, I told the crowd, is whether I have forgiven my family. Forgiveness is not a single act. It is a process, one that requires accountability, change, and time. Some relationships can be rebuilt, others cannot. What matters most is that elders retain the autonomy to choose freely. My words echoed across the hall, into Emma's bright gaze, into Tyler's uncertain hope, and even into Robert's silence. When the lecture ended, students gathered, asking questions, sharing stories. Eventually, the room emptied, leaving only family. Emma kissed my cheek. Judith squeezed my hand, and Tyler invited me to speak at Oakwood. Then they left, giving Robert space. He approached slowly, voice halting. "You look well," he said. "I am well," I answered. He confessed to therapy sessions, to recognizing patterns inherited from his grandfather, to knowing none of it excused what he had done. "I don't know if you can forgive me," he admitted, "but I am sorry." I studied him, remembering the boy who once brought me wildflowers, the father who once taught Emma to ride a bike. I did not answer with forgiveness, nor with rejection. Some truths require time to ripen. What I offered instead was presence. I listened. And in listening, perhaps the first fragile step of something new was taken. Life, I have learned, is not measured by what is stolen from us, but by what we reclaim. Autonomy, dignity, voice. These are treasures worth more than money, and they are never beyond recovery. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might be the one that gives someone else the courage to fight back.